do. They affect how you feel, and how you feel determines how you act. If your habit is to react, to complain, to procrastinate, to numb yourself, your emotional state becomes predictable. And when your emotional state is predictable, your results are predictable. That's why so many people feel like they're reliving the same year over and over again. Same stress, same problems, same promises to themselves, different calendar, same life. Let me be very clear. If you don't consciously choose your habits, your environment will choose them for you. Your phone will choose them. Your past will choose them. Your fears will choose them. And those forces don't care about your dreams. They care about comfort. They care about familiarity. They care about keeping you exactly where you are. That's why awareness is the first breakthrough. You don't change your life by hating yourself into action. You change it by noticing patterns without judgment. You start asking better questions. Why do I reach for distraction when I feel uncomfortable? Why do I quit when progress feels slow? Why do I wait for motivation instead of creating momentum? Those questions begin to loosen the grip of unconscious behavior. And here's something most people never hear. Habits are not about willpower. If they were, most people would already have the life they want. Habits are about emotional association, what you link pain to and what you link pleasure to. If you link pain to discipline, you'll avoid it. If you link pleasure to comfort, you'll stay stuck. But if you can flip that, if you can associate pleasure with growth and pain with staying the same, your behavior changes automatically. This is why habits shape destiny. They are not just actions. They are emotional patterns. And emotional patterns create identity. Over time, you stop saying, I'm trying to be disciplined, and you start saying, I am disciplined. Not because you read it in a book, but because your nervous system has evidence. Your body believes it. And once identity shifts, behavior becomes effortless. But here's the part that separates people who change their lives from people who stay inspired but stuck. They stop waiting for habits to feel natural. They understand that at first, every powerful habit feels awkward. It feels forced. It feels uncomfortable. And that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that you're interrupting an old identity. Most people interpret discomfort as danger. They feel resistance and assume they should stop. But resistance is often the doorway. It's your nervous system saying, this is unfamiliar. And unfamiliar doesn't mean bad, it means new. Growth always feels like uncertainty before it feels like confidence. So when you hear yourself say, this isn't me, you need to challenge that. Because the truth is, it isn't the old you. And that's the whole point. The future you is built by the habits you're willing to repeat before they feel natural. Before they feel easy, before they feel like just who you are. And you don't need to change everything. That's the lie that overwhelms people. You don't need a complete life overhaul. You need one habit that shifts your direction, one pattern that says, I'm no longer living unconsciously, one daily action that proves to you that you are in control again. Because once you experience that, once you feel what it's like to keep a promise to yourself, to interrupt an old pattern, to choose growth when comfort is available, you don't just build momentum, you rebuild self-trust. And self-trust changes everything. It changes how you walk into rooms, how you handle setbacks, how you speak to yourself when things get hard. This is why habits are destiny, not because they're dramatic, but because they're relentless. They don't care about your mood. They don't care about your excuses. They just compound quietly, daily. And years from now, you will not be living the life you hope for. You will be living the life your habits earned. So choose them now, because the future you is already being created by what you repeat today. Most people are waiting for motivation to save them. They're waiting to feel ready, energized, confident, inspired. They wake up each day checking their emotional temperature, asking, do I feel like doing this today? And when the answer is no, they negotiate, they postpone. They tell themselves, tomorrow will be better. But here's the hard truth. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. They rise and fall with sleep, stress, weather, opinions, and circumstances. If your future depends on motivation, then your future will always be unstable. That's why real change doesn't come from motivation. It comes from standards. A standard is not something you hope to live up to. It's something you live by. It's the line you refuse to cross. It's what you do, whether you're tired or energized, confident or doubtful, inspired or bored. Standards are what remain when motivation disappears. Think about the areas of life where you already have strong standards. You don't need motivation to brush your teeth. You don't debate it. You don't wait until you feel inspired. You do it because it's who you are and what you expect of yourself. That's the power of a standard. Once something becomes a standard, it no longer drains willpower. It becomes automatic. Now imagine if the most important areas of your life operated at that level. Your health, your focus, your integrity, your follow-through. What if taking care of your body wasn't a burst of motivation, but a baseline expectation? What if doing the work you said you'd do wasn't heroic, but normal? That shift alone would change your life. The reason so many people struggle is because they keep setting goals without raising their standards. Goals are things you aim for. Standards are the conditions you live under. You could and miss a goal and survive. You don't negotiate a standard. When your standards are low, you tolerate behaviors that cost you your future. When your standards rise, your behavior has no choice but to follow. And standards aren't loud. They're quiet. They show up in small moments when no one is watching. Do you stop when it gets uncomfortable? Or do you continue because that's who you are now? Do you let one bad day turn into a bad week? Or do you reset because quitting is no longer an option? These moments are not dramatic, but they are decisive. Here's where most people get this wrong. They think raising standards means being harsh with themselves, becoming rigid, or living in constant pressure. That's not what this is about. This is about self-respect. This is about deciding that your future matters more than your temporary mood. High standards don't come from punishment. They come from valuing your life. When you raise your standards, you stop asking, what do I feel like doing today? And start asking, what does the person I'm becoming do in this situation? That one question shifts you from emotion to identity. And identity is far more powerful than motivation, because motivation says, I'll act when I feel good. Standards say, I act because this is who I am. And once you make that shift, something remarkable happens. Your energy stabilizes, your confidence grows, your stress decreases. Why? Because your life becomes predictable to your nervous system. You know why? I'll show up. You know you won't abandon yourself at the first sign of difficulty. And that certainty creates calm. But let's be honest, raising standards is uncomfortable at first because it means letting go of excuses you've used for years. It means releasing the identity of someone who tries and stepping into the identity of someone who does. And that transition always feels awkward. It always feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar is not dangerous. It's just new. The mistake people make is trying to raise standards in everything at once. That overwhelms the system. Standards work best when they are clear, simple, and non-negotiable. One or two areas at a time. Areas that matter. Areas that create momentum. Maybe your new standard is that you move your body every day, even if it's only for 10 minutes. Maybe it's that you do the hardest task first before checking your phone. Maybe it's that you speak to yourself with respect instead of criticism. These may seem small, but standards compound faster than motivation ever will. And here's the secret. Once a standard is set, life reorganizes around it. You stop debating. You stop draining mental energy. The decision is already made. And when decisions are made in advance, discipline becomes freedom. You're no longer at war with yourself. This is how people become consistent without forcing it. They don't rely on emotional highs. They rely on agreements with themselves. And every time they honor those agreements, their self-trust grows. And self-trust is the foundation of confidence. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your standards every time. If you want a different life, you don't need more motivation. You need a higher baseline for how you live, how you think, and how you act. So stop waiting to feel ready. Stop waiting for the perfect mood. Decide what is no longer acceptable in your life. Decide what you stand for. Decide what kind of person you are becoming. And then live from that place, especially on the days when it would be easier not to. Raise your standards and your life will rise to meet them. Most people underestimate the power of small things. They're searching for the breakthrough, the massive shift, the moment when everything finally changes. They believe if they just push hard enough one time, if they make a dramatic decision, their entire life will transform overnight. And when that doesn't happen, they get discouraged. They conclude something is wrong with them. But the truth is far simpler and far more empowering. Small habits repeated consistently create massive life shifts, not because they are exciting, but because they are relentless. Think about how everything in your life was built. Your confidence didn't appear in a single moment. Your doubts didn't either. Your current level of health, focus, discipline, and belief came from patterns repeated so often they became normal. You practiced them without realizing it. And what was practiced became permanent. The same law that created your current life is the law that will create your next one. The human mind loves drama. It loves intensity. But the nervous system loves consistency. It adapts to what you do repeatedly. That's why one great workout doesn't change your body. And one productive day doesn't change your career, but showing up again and again, especially on ordinary days, rewires your identity. It sends a message to your brain, this is who we are now. And this is where people get tripped up. They don't quit because something is hard. They quit because something feels insignificant. They think this won't matter anyway. But what they're really saying is, I don't trust the process. And when you don't trust the process, you abandon it before it has time to compound. Let me tell you something that can change the way you see effort forever. Progress is not visible at first. It's silent. It's happening beneath the surface. Just like building muscle, strengthening confidence, or learning a skill, there's a phase where it feels like nothing is happening. That phase is not failure. That phase is foundation. And most people walk away right there. They stop 1 inch before momentum kicks in. They stop 1 habit away from evidence. They stop 1 week before identity begins to shift. And then they say, it didn't work. But it was working. They just didn't stay long enough to see it. Consistency is what turns the ordinary into the extraordinary. Tease not what you do once in a while that shapes your life. It's what you do when no one is applauding, when there's no immediate reward, when it feels boring. Those are the moments that separate people who change from people who stay inspired but stuck. And here's the key. Consistency does not require perfection. In fact, perfection kills consistency. When people think they must do something flawlessly, they avoid doing it at all. They miss one day and decide they've failed. They turn a small slip into a full stop. But consistency is about returning, not about never slipping. One imperfect action repeated is infinitely more powerful than a perfect plan never executed. Small habits work because they bypass fear. They don't trigger the part of the brain that says this is too much. They feel manageable. And once something feels manageable, you do it. Once you do it, you gain evidence. Once you gain evidence, your belief shifts. And belief is the fuel of momentum. That's why starting small is not a weakness. It's a strategy. It's how you teach your nervous system to feel safe with growth. 5 minutes of focus a day can change your career. 10 minutes of movement can change your energy. 1 honest conversation a week can change your relationships. These actions may look small, but repeated over time, they reshape your life. And consistency builds something even more valuable than results. It builds self-trust. Every time you show up for a small habit, you send a message to yourself, I can rely on me. And when you trust yourself, you stop second-guessing. You stop negotiating. You stop looking for permission. This is how confidence is built. Not through speeches, not through affirmations alone, but through behavior. Your mind believes what you prove to it, and consistency is proof. Let's talk about momentum, because momentum is misunderstood. People think momentum comes from success. It doesn't. Momentum comes from motion, from doing something, anything, again and again. And once momentum exists, motivation follows, not the other way around. That's why waiting to feel motivated keeps people stuck. They're waiting for energy that only arrives after action. Consistency creates energy. Consistency creates clarity. Consistency creates confidence. But it only works if you stay in the game long enough. This is also why comparing yourself to others is so destructive. You don't see their small habits. You only see their results. And when you compare your beginning to someone else's middle, you convince yourself you're behind. But everyone who has built something meaningful did it the same way, through small, repeated actions that no one celebrated at first. So stop asking if what you're doing is enough. Start asking if you're willing to repeat it. Stop chasing intensity. Start committing to rhythm, because life doesn't change in leaps. It changes in layers. You don't need a new personality. You don't need more talent. You don't need a different EA. Saint, you need one small habit that you're willing to repeat long enough for it to become part of who you are. And once that happens, growth stops being something you force and starts being something you expect. Stay consistent and let time do what it does best. Multiply your effort into a life you never thought small steps could create. Most people think identity is something you discover. They believe one day they'll finally find themselves and then everything will make sense. But identity is not something you uncover like a hidden treasure. Identity is something you build, and you build it through action. Who you believe you are is shaped far more by what you repeatedly do than by what you repeatedly think. You can tell yourself you're confident all day long, but if your actions say you avoid challenges, your nervous system won't buy the story. You can tell yourself you're disciplined, but if you keep breaking promises to yourself, your body knows the truth. Your mind may lie, but your behavior never does. That's why identity always follows action, not intention. Most people live with a painful gap between who they say they want to be and how they actually live. They have good intentions, they care, they plan, they visualize, but intention without action creates frustration. And over time, that frustration quietly turns into self-doubt, not because they're incapable, but because they've trained themselves to associate intention with inaction. Here's the shift that changes everything. You don't become someone new and then act differently. You act differently and then you become someone new. The order matters. If you wait to feel like a confident person before taking bold action, you'll wait forever. Confidence is the reward for courage, not the prerequisite. Think about how children learn who they are. They try, they fall, they try again. They don't sit around questioning their identity. They build it through experience. But somewhere along the way, adults reverse the process. They think, once I feel ready, then I'll act. And that belief alone keeps them stuck. Your nervous system updates identity based on evidence. Every action you take sends a signal. When you show up despite fear, your body learns, I'm someone who can handle discomfort. When you follow through when it's inconvenient, your body learns, I'm reliable. When you speak up instead of staying silent, your body learns, my voice matters. These lessons don't come from thinking. They come from doing. This is why small actions are so powerful. They don't just create results, they create identity shifts. One workout doesn't just burn calories, it reinforces the identity of someone who takes care of their body. One focused work session doesn't just move a project forward, it reinforces the identity of someone who follows through. One honest boundary doesn't just protect your time, it reinforces the identity of someone who respects themselves. And identity, once formed, becomes self-reinforcing. When you see yourself a certain way, you naturally act in alignment with that belief. That's why real change can feel effortless after a while. You're no longer forcing behavior, you're expressing who you believe you are. But let's be honest about the part no one likes to talk about. Changing identity feels uncomfortable because every new action challenges an old story, and the old story will fight back. It will whisper, this isn't you. It will remind you of past failures. It will try to pull you back into familiar patterns, not because you're weak, but because the nervous system prefers what it knows. That resistance is not a sign you're doing something wrong, it's a sign you're doing something new. Most people misinterpret that feeling. They think discomfort means danger. They think doubt means they should stop. But doubt is often just the echo of an outdated identity losing its grip. And if you stay with the action long enough, the identity catches up. This is where consistency becomes critical. One action can challenge identity, but repeated action rewrites it. You don't need to prove anything to the world. You need to prove something to yourself. And the proof comes from repetition. And here's something freeing. You don't have to believe in yourself to act. You just have to act long enough for belief to form. Belief is not the starting line, it's the finish line of repeated behavior. That's why waiting to feel confident, disciplined, or 80 is a trap. Feelings follow actions, not the other way around. Every time you act in alignment with the person you want to become, even when it feels unnatural, you are casting a vote for that identity. And votes add up. This also means you must be careful about the actions you repeat unconsciously, because they are casting votes too. Every time you avoid a hard conversation, you reinforce the identity of someone who avoids discomfort. Every time you quit when things get difficult, you reinforce the identity of someone who doesn't follow through. These patterns are not permanent, but they are powerful. The good news is this: identity is flexible. It updates in real time. You are never locked into who you've been. You are only influenced by what you continue to do. And the moment you change your behavior, you begin changing the story your nervous system tells about who you are. You don't need a breakthrough moment. You need a breakthrough pattern. One behavior you repeat often enough that it becomes familiar. One action that feels awkward at first but natural later. That's how identities are built. So stop asking yourself, who am I really? Start asking, what am I doing repeatedly? Because that answer tells the truth. And if you don't like the answer, you don't need to shame yourself. You need to choose a different action today. Act first. Let identity follow everything you do. Every habit you keep, every habit you avoid is driven by one simple force, not logic. No willpower, not even discipline. It's pain and pleasure. Human beings will always move away from pain and toward pleasure. Always. And the habits you have today exist because on some level your nervous system believes they protect you from pain or give you pleasure. That's why people keep doing things they know are bad for them. That's why someone keeps procrastinating even though it creates stress. That's why someone stays stuck even though they want more. Because in the short term, the habit feels safer, it feels easier, it feels more comfortable. And the brain is wired to prioritize immediate relief over long-term reward. This is where most people lose control of their habits without realizing it. They think they're making conscious choices, but they're actually reacting to emotional associations that were built years ago. Your brain has learned this action equals relief, or this behavior equals comfort, or this avoidance equals safety. And once that association is wired in, behavior becomes automatic. So if you really want to change your habits, you don't start by fighting yourself. You start by changing what you associate pain and pleasure with. Let's talk about procrastination for a moment. People think procrastination is laziness. It's not. It's pain avoidance. The task feels uncomfortable, uncertainty, fear of failure, fear of judgment, so the brain looks for relief. Scrolling, snacking, distraction, and the moment you escape the task, you feel a tiny bit better. That relief is pleasure. And the brain says, remember this, do it again. Over time, procrastination becomes a habit, not because you want to fail, but because your brain has learned that avoidance equals pleasure. Now flip that. Imagine if every time you procrastinated, you immediately associated it with pain, not punishment, but awareness. Imagine linking procrastination to the long-term stress, the lost opportunities, the disappointment you feel when you break promises to yourself. And then imagine linking action, even imperfect action, to pride, relief, momentum, and self-respect. That's how habits change. People don't change because they understand something intellectually. They change when the emotional associations shift, when staying the same becomes more painful than changing, when growth feels more rewarding than comfort. Right now, many people are associating pain with discipline, pain with effort, pain with responsibility, and you're associating pleasure with ease, distraction, and escape. As long as those associations remain, habits will not change. They can't. The nervous system won't allow it. But the moment you begin to link pain to staying stuck and pleasure to progress, everything changes. This is why leverage is so important. Leverage is the emotional reason you finally say enough. It's the moment where continuing the old pattern hurts more than stepping into the unknown. And leverage doesn't come from beating yourself up. It comes from telling yourself the truth, clearly, honestly, repeatedly. What is this habit really costing me? What will my life look like if nothing changes in 5 years? What am I losing every time I choose comfort over growth? These questions aren't meant to depress you. They're meant to wake you up. And then you balance that pain by consciously creating pleasure around new habits. You celebrate progress, not perfection. You acknowledge effort. You let yourself feel proud when you show up, even when the result isn't perfect, because pride is powerful. Pride reinforces identity, and identity drives behavior. This is where people get it wrong again. They wait for results to feel good, but results take time. Habits need reinforcement now. If you don't attach pleasure to the process, you won't stay in it long enough to see the outcome. Your nervous system needs immediate feedback. That feedback doesn't have to be external. It can be internal. A moment of recognition, a moment of gratitude, a moment where you say, I kept my word today. That moment matters more than you realize. Over time, the brain starts to associate action with reward, effort with pride, discomfort with growth. And once that shift happens, habits stop feeling like a battle. They start feeling like alignment. This is also why environment matters so much. Your environment constantly reinforces pain and pleasure associations. If junk food is easy and movement is hard, your habits will follow. If distraction is one click away and focus requires effort, your habits will follow. You're not weak. You're conditioned. Change the environment and you change the associations. Make good habits easier. Make bad habits harder. Reduce friction for growth. Increase friction for escape. These small adjustments can create massive behavioral change because they work with your biology, not against it. And here's the most important part. Pain and pleasure don't just shape habits. They shape standards. They shape identity. Over time, what once felt painful becomes normal. What once felt uncomfortable becomes familiar. And what once felt impossible becomes expected. But only if you consciously rewire the associations. If you don't, the past keeps running the present. Old emotional patterns keep dictating new decisions, and people end up living lives that don't match their values, not because they don't care, but because they never changed what their nervous system was trained to chase. You don't need more self-control. You need better conditioning. Decide today what pain you're no longer willing to live with. Decide what pleasure you're going to attach to growth. Decide what habits deserve reward and which ones deserve honest awareness. Do that consistently, and behavior will change automatically. Change the associations, and you change the habits. There comes a moment in every person's life when the truth gets uncomfortably clear. Not intellectually clear, emotionally clear. The moment you realize that waiting has a cost, that postponing has consequences, that every time you say later, you are silently choosing the same results again. And most people never make this moment conscious. They live in delay. They live in preparation. They live in someday. And someday becomes years. The biggest lie people tell themselves is not I can't, it's I have time. Time feels infinite when you're not paying attention. But life doesn't change on intention, it changes on decision. And a real decision is not a preference. It's not a hope. It's not a wish. A real decision cuts off alternatives. A real decision changes behavior immediately. And that's why so many people avoid it. Because the moment you truly decide, you can no longer hide. Most people are waiting for a signal, a sign, more confidence, more clarity, less fear. But clarity comes after movement, not before it. Confidence comes after action, not before it. And fear doesn't disappear when you wait. It grows. Because every delay trains your nervous system to believe that hesitation is safer than progress. Here's the hard truth. Your life will not suddenly slow down and give you space to change. Responsibilities will increase, pressure will increase, expectations will increase, and if you don't build the habits and standards now, you won't magically find it easier later. Later is heavier. Later is more complex. Later has more consequences. That's why change must happen now, not when things are perfect, but when they are real. Now is when you still have leverage. Now is when small changes still create big momentum. Now is when the future is still flexible. Waiting doesn't preserve opportunity. It quietly erodes it. And this isn't about urgency driven by fear. It's about urgency driven by respect for your life, your potential, your limited time. You don't need to panic. You need to decide calmly, clearly, completely. Because the moment you decide, your brain starts reorganizing, your focus sharpens, your energy shifts. You stop asking if and start asking how. And that shift alone puts you ahead of most people who are still negotiating with themselves. People say they want change, but what they really want is change without discomfort, change without uncertainty, change without inconvenience. But growth demands a price, and the price is always paid up front in the form of discomfort, discipline, and consistency. The reward comes later. That's the deal. It's always been the deal. The people who transform their lives aren't braver than everyone else. They just stop delaying the pain of discipline and start delaying the pain of regret. They understand that both paths have discomfort, but only one path leads somewhere. And regret is heavier than effort, always. Think about how many times you've told yourself, I'll start on Monday, or once things calm down, or when I feel more ready. Those statements feel harmless, but they train your identity. They reinforce the belief that your word is flexible, that your future can wait. And every time you repeat that pattern, it becomes easier to repeat again. This is how years disappear. The shift happens when you stop trying to motivate yourself and instead make a clean break with delay. When you say, I don't need to feel ready to begin, I begin, and readiness will follow. That's how adults take control of their lives. You don't need to know every step. You need to take the first one. You don't need certainty. You need commitment. You don't need permission. You need self-leadership. And self-leadership means acting in alignment with your future, not your mood. Right now, anywhere inside you, there's a version of you that already knows this. The version that's tired of repeating the same patterns. The version that's tired of the mental negotiations. The version that's tired of knowing what to do and not doing it. That version doesn't need more information. It needs a decision that says, I'm done waiting. A decision that says, I move now, even imperfectly. A decision that says, my future matters enough to act today. Because once you decide, the next step shows up, and then the next. Momentum is not something you wait for. It's something you generate. And it always begins with now, not tomorrow, not next week, not someday. Now is the moment your habits are either reinforced or interrupted. Now is when identity is either repeated or rewritten. Now is when your future either stays theoretical or becomes real. And here's the most powerful part. You don't need to change everything today. You just need to stop postponing the first step. One action taken now has more power than 1,000 intentions delayed. So choose now, not because it's easy, but because it's honest. Choose now because your life is happening, whether you decide or not. Choose now because the cost of waiting is already too high. The time to change isn't coming. It's already here.